stream on the off day, but I'm like, maybe not. Let's not do that because it's gonna mess up the day schedule, and people are gonna be kind of confused on on when to on when I'm streaming or not. And I'm like, yeah, I just started the stream schedule, so let's not go off the days yet. So I'm happy that I'm loving the game so far, and I'm gonna go back into it today. But yeah, let's get into a little bit of news, and then also gonna have one react, and that's about it. The react should be a little bit more lighthearted. Uh, so get us away from the heavier topics, and yeah. So firstly, before we get into the news from Al Jazeera, let's um going to show you this video. This is in Stockholm. Yeah, pretty pretty good video from coming out of Stockholm. Um, but yeah, just wanted to show that nice little bit of positivity.
Have
Let's go
probably
into.
been destroyed. But thinking about
Uh, wait, what? Did it say ad blockers are not allowed to be used? I chat. Also, I keep forgetting that I need to put Oh, let me see. What is chat arena? Chat arena.
them gives her a chance to escape into a fictional world where life is easier and kinder to children like her. Jessica Washington, Al Jazeera.
That's it from me, Elizabeth Puranam, for this news hour. Neve Barker is up next with more of our continuing coverage of the war on Gaza.
It is burning and we're running out of time. Why aren't we doing more to deal with climate change? Our American
We're getting ads because yeah, they just got done with their segment. So I think I wanted to show the segment going all the way back to here.
It needs to stop.
Protest organisers were under intense pressure to postpone or cancel. The Prime Minister said a demonstration would be disrespectful because it coincided with Armistice Day. The Interior Minister, Home Secretary Suella Braverman,
It coincides with it coincides with Armistice Day, the day that World War One ended. So we need to we need to we need to not worry about these other these kids that are dying. You cannot have a protest because because men that volunteered to go to war, men and women that volunteered to go to war during World War One will be very disappointed at you for for wanting to keep Palestinian children safe. That's basically what's happening here.
even described the pro-Palestinian rallies as hate marches.
It is not a hate march. As you can see, we are not putting up posters that are showing kind of like anti-Semitism. If there was, we would have been like showing some sort of anti-Semitism, but there's nothing like that here.
The Cenotaph War Memorial was made part of a police exclusion zone for fear that it might.
Also, the funniest thing is that whenever you're you're cheering for a minority group, which is it could be Black Lives Matter or the Free Palestine or like the BDS movement, you're gonna have the majority class, and even though Sunak is he's technically a minority, but he's a part of the Tories, so he's a part of the conservative class. They still see it as as a violation of their rights, even though you're just campaigning for equal rights.
Might be vandalized, and nearly 2,000 extra police were on duty. There was violence, but it was from far-right white English nationalists who clashed with police and threw bottles and other objects at the officers. The pro-Palestinian marches remained peaceful.
People are reasserting the fundamental right.
That's so funny. The Jewish march, like the Jewish is, you know, the not Jewish, is the Zionist marches are getting are having people, you know, throw things at the police and stuff like that, but you don't even see that here at all in the Palestinian marches. That's insane. It shows that like which side is, you know, for peace and which side isn't. Like you can tell in these clips.
To protest, to hold those in power to account, and to march peacefully on the streets, calling for a ceasefire, calling for peace on Armistice Day of all days.
The size of this protest and the fact that it's happened at all is vindication for the organisers who've resisted so many days of pressure to have it cancelled. But they say, as long as the killing in Gaza continues, so will the protests. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, Central London.
Tens of thousands of people have.
I think that's a good point to stop for the time being. Also I wanted to talk about another thing of how, well, actually it'll coincide with the video we're gonna watch later. Let's watch this Vox video on the Israeli settlements explained.
This is me driving in what I think is one of the most bizarre places in the world. I just crossed over from Israel.
If you can recognize the voice and you seen the face, that second of a face, that's Johnny Harris right there. So, we're gonna have an interesting video. Because he did make a video 2 days ago, and that one, it was probably the best you would get from a liberal, to be fair, like from just like, a regular liberal Democrat. Like it was probably the best you're gonna get from them. Not to say that, it was like I will say, because honestly, it wasn't even like poorly like done. Like somewhat like, I mean, one of the videos I can say was poorly done was the coup video. I think we watched the coup video on this stream before, and yeah, it's insane.
Into the West Bank. If you look at a map of where I'm driving right now, you'll see a jumbled mess of Palestinian towns and villages, which are shown in green, and Israeli settlements, which are in blue. Many people think of this territory as Palestine, but of the 3 million people living out here, almost 20% of them are Jewish Israeli citizens. The Israelis living out here are called settlers. They live in the West Bank, but they're citizens of Israel. As I drive, I'm looking at effectively two different nations woven into each other through decades of conflict. I visited 15 settlements all over the West Bank, talking to people who've decided to pack up and move out into the middle of disputed land. We'll meet them in coming videos. But first, I want to take a look at the maps that help explain how the West Bank got to look like this.
We're not going to watch those videos because I don't really care to give any of those idiots airtime right now, any of those dogs airtime. Those are terrorists, by the way. I do want to say that is terrorism. In the like literally it's a definition of terrorism. Yep. If I just type in one of these, like if I just type in settlers, yeah, it's called settler terrorism. Basically it is an act of terrorism to settle in a land that you do not have any claim to. it is illegal to do that, and for a country to provide like to tell people to do that. That is a war crime in and of itself, and that is terrorism. It's called settler terrorism. So that is just one of the many laws that Israel has broken time and time again. Because just because they took when okay, let me explain this better. When they took when like you might hear this like from some it's right from some people um that are Zionists. They will say like, well, Israel we talked about this actually. I think it was like 2 days ago. Yet not yesterday, but the day before. That is in Israel. Um, like they took all of their settlers out of Gaza. Technically, that's true, but they just moved them to the West Bank, which is Palestinian territory. That is literally Palestinian territory by the Constitution of Israel and by that is Palestinian territory by the Constitution of Israel and by the UN that has been that has been in negotiations with them since since this happened, like since all of this happened. It's insane.
So let's go back to 1948 when the map looked a lot different. Back then, all this land was controlled by Great Britain. And due to growing tensions between Jews and Arabs, the UN worked with Britain to split the land into two states. One for Jews, Israel, and another one for Arabs, Palestine. The Jews
It wasn't the UK's at first. So what ended up happening is because the Ottoman Empire lost, they were on the losing side. Um, they ended up becoming like the UK's like own like protectorate state in the Middle East. But then when a couple Zionists asked Britain to to do this again, like they asked them to like to give like to give them a state. They asked if they wanted it in Argentina, Uganda, or here in Palestine. Um, and that's where everything kind of went crazy because yeah, they ended up deciding Palestine, and they gave the 5% of Jews um that were in Palestine. I think it was 4% actually. They ended up giving them the majority status, and the Palestinians ended up getting the even though they made up 95% of the population, they were given minority status. It was literally settler colonialism at from the start of this nation. This isn't this isn't like it's not a complicated conflict. It's literally the same conflict that happened in America with Native Americans. It is the exact same.
in the region accepted this plan and declared independence of the State of Israel. But the Arab states in the region saw this plan as just more European colonialism. They didn't accept the plan and instead declared war on Israel. Israel won the war, pushing well past the borders of the UN plan. During the peace negotiations, a ceasefire line was drawn in green ink. It became known as the Green Line.
That's the West Bank right here, and then that little strip is Gaza. 2.2 million people live in that strip right here, and almost half of them kids. And also they're moving into to the West Bank too. They're just trying to do it a little bit. They're thinking that if they can cause enough ruckus in Gaza, that you're not even going to think about the West Bank. Remember the West Bank. 11-year-old just got arrested there for throwing a rock. So remember about always keep in mind the West Bank too is a state, and uh it was also a state declared by the UN. So
It wasn't necessarily a border, it was just a ceasefire line, with this being the State of Israel, and this section being controlled by Jordan, who had taken control of it during the war. The Jordanians named this newly seized land the West Bank because it was west of the Jordan River. The fragile ceasefire remained until 1967, when Israel fought another war with its Arab neighbors. Israel wasn't looking to take over land in this war, but in just 6 days of fighting, it blew past the Green Line.
Did you just say? He just said that they weren't trying to take over land. So how did they do it? Huh, I wonder. How did they take over land if they weren't trying to do it? I'm just a little small guy that was able to, bomb Egypt's and Jordan's and Lebanon's entire air force. I was able to do that in a night. I was able to do that in a night. I'm just a little small being that was able to destroy literally 3 countries simultaneously, their air force. So that way they couldn't fight back with me.
And seized a whole swath of land, including the entire West Bank. Suddenly, Israel had a decision to make. Do they make the West Bank a part of Israel and give the 1.1 million Arabs living there Israeli citizenship and voting rights?
Newsflash, they didn't, and they still don't. What happens is if you're a Palestinian living in Israel, you're a second-class citizen. It's even written into the Constitution. It would be like if in our American Constitution that white rights are better and they have to be upheld. They cannot be taken away from you. Basically, yes, this is a white nation for white people. That's literally like if you would put that in a if you would put that in the Constitution, like in our Constitution, that's what it would say, because that's the Constitution that Israel has. They have a ostensibly racist Constitution.
Rights? Do they give the land back to their enemy Jordan? Or else do they let the people create their own Palestinian state? This became a major debate in Israeli politics. Many Israelis saw this war they just won as not just a military victory, but a religious.
I'm actually not even gonna. I'm not gonna finish it. I'm not gonna finish it because I'm about to say we're past this point, and a lot of it isn't even the viewpoint from the last settler colonialism video that he put out. So, how okay. So how Palestinians were expelled from their homes by Vox. This is another Vox video. I was gonna watch this one because I want to talk about the Nakba, because I know a lot of people do not know about the Nakba. It is not a very talked about situation.
My village is a very beautiful one.
Oh my God.
My village is a very beautiful one. It has a mountain full of trees of figs and grapes, and it faces the main road to Jerusalem.
This is a story about what happened here in 1948.
We are only 750 people, and everybody knows each other. I came from a big family. We lived a good life. We never expect to be massacred. It was a black spot in the history.
That history has been carefully concealed, purposefully distorted, and in the West, largely forgotten.
They put our village as an example with what they can do.
The massacre in this village was one of many in a series of catastrophic events.
They massacred and raped. They raped little kids. Also, they raped old elderly women that cannot leave their home.
That became known as the Nakba, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were.
And whenever I'm saying they, and I'm saying it in like a negative sense, is usually the IDF.
Violently displaced from their homeland in order to create the state of Israel.
In May of 1948, a new Jewish state, Israel, was born in a bath of blood.
The borders of Palestine have been changed forcefully over time, but historically, this region has been home to Palestinians for centuries, with hundreds of villages and thriving cities. One of them being the central city of Jerusalem, with holy sites important to Jewish, Christian, and Muslim people. By the late Ottoman Empire, Palestinians living here.
Also, I forgot to say that they bomb those sites, by the way. Whenever it's like Israel is a like the funniest thing about it is Zionists usually don't read the Torah, so they're like extremely secular. Even though you would think because it's a Jewish state that they are like, extraordinarily religious. They're not. They're really, really secular. The in the show that is that they literally bomb. They don't care what is there. Like that could be like a historically like religious site even to them. They will still bomb it because they'll be like, "Oh, it was Hamas there. It was um, you know, it was a terrorist group there, so we had to do it. We had to, we had to bomb that whole entire place." And then when they don't bomb a mosque or, any like holy site, they'll just go in and start beating the shit out of every single uh goer there. It's insane.
Were overwhelmingly Muslim, with minority Christian and Jewish native populations too. But regardless of religion, Palestinians were often referred to as Arabs, people of the Arabic-speaking world, despite their distinctive culture.
Palestinians have long distinguished themselves as Ahl Palestine, or the people of Palestine. They developed a distinctive Arabic accent, they developed regional food, regional dress, and family ties.
But by the time World War I began, several key political forces were competing for control of these lands. First, there was a growing Arab political movement, looking for independence from the Ottoman Empire in hopes of a unified Arab state that would include Palestine. Then,
Yeah, and definitely they got hoodwinked by Britain. So if you don't know that story, because I don't think they're probably gonna go into it, that uh the Arab movement, they went to Britain first, and they kicked out basically they kicked out anybody else that wasn't the Zionists. That wasn't like the Zionists basically, right? Well, they also no, yeah. Wait a minute, no. So they kicked out everyone else. They even started going on campaigns against countries that were next to them, like Lebanon. That's why uh some Lebanese still see it as still see them as traitors. Which I mean, yeah, they were traitors to their own. They went to the British, which yeah, that would effectively make you a traitor. Um, but I don't agree with with what happened to them after. As what we have seen and what this is about to talk about, the Nakba. Because yeah, the Zionists, obviously went to Britain and they said, well, we don't really like brown people a lot, so yeah, we're gonna send you back over there and give you a lot of ammunition, give you a lot of guns to take it back over.
there were Zionists, a political group that had one main goal: the creation of a Jewish state. Zionism was a response to an increasingly brutal climate for Jewish people, particularly in Europe and Russia, where there was a massive wave of anti-Semitism, including large-scale attacks in the late 1800s.
And people also really did people did think at that time that it could it wasn't a bad idea because of the sheer the sheer anti-Semitism that was going on, and it's still going on today. So anti-Semitism hasn't stopped. I won't say that. I won't say that it stopped or anything, but it's also been made worse because of what Israel is doing to Palestine. It's not like it's making it any better. They get beat worse if you don't agree with the Israeli government. So yeah, it's not like it's like a better state for them than, in the US.
Hundreds and early 1900s. After briefly considering other areas for a new state, including Uganda and Argentina, Zionist leaders decided on Palestine because of its connection to early religious history. But there was a third key group with political interests here: the British. Control of the region would allow them to expand their spheres of influence and protect trade routes to India. During World War I, since both the British and the Arab independence movement wanted Palestine, they decided to go after the Ottomans together with an important pledge. Through a series of letters in 1916, an Arab leader and a British official agreed that if Arabs would help the British fight the Ottomans and give the British economic and other foreign privileges in Arab lands, in return, the British would recognize and support an independent Arab state. Soon, the Arabs started doing their part in revolting against the Ottomans, making it easier for the British to move in. But the next year, the British issued a new declaration and betrayed the Arabs.
In 1917, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine.
Without consulting the native Palestinian population, the British issued what's known as the Balfour Declaration, supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jews.
Something that should be learned from this is to never trust the British. Never trust the British with anything pertaining something to get someone back at, because it will bite you in the back. They are snakes. The British government is, for the most part, snakes.
Jewish people. So instead of supporting the idea of Palestine as part of a unified and independent Arab state, the British pledged to help secure this land for Zionists. It was a strategic move. This declaration opened up a pathway for Britain to gain power in Palestine,
under the guise that it was supporting the self-determination of another people, of a people in Palestine who don't reside there yet.
As for Palestine's majority Arab population, the declaration referred to them as non-Jewish communities, who would be given civil and religious rights, but not political rights. A few years later, after World War I ended, Britain gained control of Palestine through a mandate that also required them to put the Balfour plans for Jewish settlement in motion. And they did. Between 1922 and 1931, the Jewish population more than doubled. The migration helped the Zionist movement gain steam, and a slogan took off: a land without people for a people without land.
And it sends a message to Western leaders that the people who had been living in Palestine for generations could just be easily moved elsewhere. The idea was that those inhabitants weren't a people with ties to that land.
Well, yes, because they were brown. I mean, because Britain had a major problem when the Vikings tried to do that to them. So, it shows that, Britain they don't have any regard for it, for another group, which, white supremacist countries like the US, is an offshoot of that too. They don't see these people as people. They don't see them as people. They see them as just things we need to move off the land, like objects.
Palestine was, of course, a land with a people. In 1931, there were more than 850,000 Palestinian Arabs in the region, still the vast majority. But with the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party in particular,
Hate became a rallying call.
Jewish flight from Europe became even more urgent, and Palestine started to see the biggest wave of Jewish immigration yet. Violence broke out, rooted in tensions over land. Jewish settlers purchased swaths of fertile land and evicted tenant farmers, creating a crisis of hundreds of thousands of landless, dispossessed Palestinian Arabs. Though Palestinians fiercely rebelled against both British colonial forces and Jewish settlers, they were brutally crushed by the British.
They put in Palestine more troops to repress that rebellion than they had stationed in India at that time, all of India.
These troops killed thousands of Palestinians, including many of their leaders, and the British began training and arming Zionist militias to suppress the rebellion too. But the rebellion continued. So, in an attempt to prevent further Palestinian resistance, the British began to limit Jewish immigration into Palestine. This ended up angering Zionist extremists, leading to more violence. So, in 1947, after decades of trying to manipulate both Palestinian Arabs and Zionists to keep their control over Palestine, Britain gave up and handed the question of Palestine to someone else.
To the United Nations also came the problem of Palestine. In recent years, this small country had been the scene of disorder and bloodshed.
They figured, there is this new thing called the United Nations. Here, in your lap, Palestine, first gift. So The United Nations has now to figure out, how do you disentangle this thing that the British helped create?
A UN special committee proposed the land be divided into two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem as a separate UN-controlled entity. It was called the Partition Plan of 1947. The plan shocked Palestinians.
We could not accept
Because you see how much less land they had, even though they had the bigger population?
the partition plan, because at that time the population, we were almost 2-to-1.
But the plan proposed giving over half the land, and often the most fertile areas, to the Jewish state.
From a purely pragmatic perspective, the partition plan didn't make much sense for Palestinian Arabs.
That wasn't the only problem with the plan. Within this proposed area of the Jewish state were hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, including both Muslims and Christians, who had lived there for generations.
On a moral level, the idea of making hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs minorities in their own homeland seemed unjust and unfair.
In November 1947, the UN put the plan to a vote. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, and after lobbying from US leaders and Zionists, the UN voted in favor of partition.
And you heard that right, U.S. leaders too, because U.S. has always been the biggest factor for Israel's existence.
Finally, a momentous decision to partition the Holy Land's 10,000 square miles.
Britain announced their mandate over Palestine would end on May 15, 1948, even as Palestinians continued to reject the UN's decision to partition the land.
After the partition took place, in 1947, we really were scared something might happen to us.
By the end of 1947, Zionists had several well-developed paramilitary forces, the largest one known as the Haganah, and more extremist militias like Irgun. On March 10th, a couple of months before the British mandate would end, the Haganah adopted what was called Plan Dalet, or Plan D. On paper, the main goal was to gain control of the Jewish state, as laid out in the partition plan, while also defending Jewish settlements outside of the borders. In reality, that's where the majority of these operations took place, outside of the UN's proposed Jewish state. Some carried out by Haganah and others by more radical militias. Many of these operations focused on isolating Jerusalem and the roads to it. A set of brutal instructions called for the destruction of Arab villages by setting fire to, blowing up, and planting mines, especially those population centers which were difficult to control. In case of resistance, it called for the population to be expelled outside of the borders of the state, villages emptied, and for the occupation and control of Arab villages along main transportation arteries. One of the most widely publicized village massacres happened here in Deir Yassin.
We lived in Deir Yassin, which is about 4 miles west of Jerusalem.
91-year-old Dawood Assad was there the day of the massacre and was 18 at the time.
We saw all night, that night, the night before, a movement of lights, armored trucks moving around, moving like this. So we know that something is wrong. That's why we knew that something is going to happen to our village.
On April 9th, 1948, extremist Zionist forces, executing Plan D, closed in on Deir Yassin, even though the village had made a local peace pact with...
It's a double entendre to say Zionist extremists when, the movement of Zionism in general is extremist.
Neighboring Jewish settlements.
Friday morning, they attacked us. My uncles...
Oh, hey, V. How are you?
They were shooting at them, and I was there loading the gun for them and shooting. We fought about almost 2.5 hours. They found my uncle, and they put him on the wall, and they shot him 8 bullets in cold blood. My grandmother, she went in the village to see my mother. On her way, she got shot. My brother Omar fell from her shoulder to the floor, but the floor was a concrete one.
Dawood escaped through a trench.
I went down, all the way down here like this. So it was 4 hours walking to Jerusalem.
To this day, the archive of the Israeli army refuses to release many of the images and intelligence reports on Deir Yassin. But one UN report detailed circumstances of great savagery. including women and children, stripped, lined up, photographed, and slaughtered. Roughly 100 people, largely children and the elderly, were killed in the village. As for Dawood, he later reunited with the group of Deir Yassin captives in Jerusalem, including his sister and mother.
My mother says, "Where is your Uncle Radwan?" He says, "He was shot." "Where is your grandmother?" He said, "He was shot, and Umar was with her." So everybody has a commotion, you know. Where's Fatima? Where's Ibrahim? Where's Amaryam? Where is David? Where is Ahmed? Where is Ismail? I'm a dream about it, you know.
News of what happened in Deir Yassin spread quickly, with far-reaching effects.
The Zionist militias used it as a propaganda tool to tell people about it everywhere. The idea was that if you don't leave, we will do to you what happened in Deir Yassin.
Stories.
Does that sound like a moral army to you? I'm just gonna be honest. Like, does it sound like a moral army? Does it sound like a moral army that that rapes women and children, like elder? And when it says woman, they're not like describing. I mean, because raping of women is bad anyway. But they rape the elderly that couldn't leave their houses. They also rape the kids. So, you know, yeah, the most moral army in the world, honestly.
Came out about women being raped, about babies being killed, and induced a great deal of fear among the Palestinian Arab population, many of them fleeing as a result.
And I say moral army because that is what that is literally what Israel says that they are. They are the most moral army. That is what the US actually says that they are too, is the most moral army. I don't understand how can you think that when this is how they, decided to do that.
Result.
Jewish troops routed Arab forces from the city of Haifa.
After taking Deir Yassin, Zionist paramilitary groups cleared major cities, including Haifa and Jaffa, and took hundreds of smaller villages and towns too. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced to flee, pouring into neighboring states as refugees. Plan D became the blueprint for carrying out the ethnic cleansing of historic Palestine to make room for a new state.
Oh wait, I just thought about it. But let me see something. I'm gonna.
And on
put
May
that up
14th, the day before the British mandate ended, Zionists declared this state as Israel. But the creation of Israel didn't end the Nakba. Neighboring Arab countries that were overwhelmed by Palestinian refugees immediately went to war with Israel.
Now united in a League of Arab States, they are insistent that the entry of refugees into Palestine must be ended.
The fighting lasted for months. Arab armies eventually lost while Palestinians continued to be killed and forced out throughout that time. Palestinians who fled often carried only enough to stay away for a few weeks, hoping they'd eventually return.
Yeah, they thought they would return home because they didn't think that, that they could be kicked out for the rest of their, lives.
Home.
A lot of them locked their doors, put their key in their pocket, and then moved to safer ground. When you leave the house and you take your key with you, it's because you're planning to go home. In the case of the Palestinians, those refugees weren't allowed to return.
Refugees trying to return were often shot at. Zionist paramilitary operations also tried to prevent them from returning again by destroying the villages.
That act of preventing their return compounded the Nakba. So the Nakba is both the forcible displacement of Palestinians from their homes and lands and country, as well as preventing them to return once the fighting was over.
Palestinian society was dismembered, crushed. More than half of the Palestinian people became refugees, stateless, dispossessed of their land.
Over time, the State of Israel covered up the physical evidence of an Arab Palestine. Place names were often changed from Arabic ones to Hebrew ones. The Jewish National Fund embarked on a massive effort to plant thousands of acres of pine forests and recreational areas on top of hundreds of ruined Palestinian villages.
Even though
Yep, they made them. They wanted to make them completely unlivable. That was the reason why they put pine trees there, because trees do grow in Palestine. Trees did grow in Palestine. trees, they were olive trees. They were a big, like they literally that was the main choice for farmers was to have olive trees and farm from those. The reason why they planted all of these pine trees was so that way no one could live there or you know and want to come back. Basically it was just to erase, like, how sadistic you would have to be to, like, like, to erase an entire population, like, existence of even being here.
Though these forests have now grown into big pine trees, Palestinians have not forgotten their homelands.
While we know that roughly 6,000 Israelis lost their lives in the violence of the Nakba, records for Palestinian deaths weren't kept. It's estimated to be around 15,000. By the end of the Nakba, roughly 750,000 Palestinians had been forcefully expelled, and more than 500 villages destroyed. Though the UN's partition plan allotted Israel 56% of the land, through the Nakba, Israel captured 78% of the land. It was everything except what's now known as the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. Today, that's up to at least 85% of the total area, turning 6 million Palestinians into refugees without a homeland. It's why, around the same time that Israelis are celebrating Independence Day, Palestinians are out protesting on May 15th, holding up keys as a symbol of the homes they lost and the hope to return. For them, the Nakba isn't just a moment in history. It's a catastrophe that never really ended.
I'm a dream about it, We lived a good life till 1948 when we were displaced.
And yeah, I mean, this is actually a really good Vox video. Sometimes Vox does hit it on the mark, and I think they did with this video. So, yeah.